What's up guys, Houndish here, and today it's time for This Week at Bungie. And for this week's update they're talking about some sandbox stuff for Season 15. Specifically, they touch on ability tuning, so there are plenty of subclass changes, including adjustments to light subclasses. And there are some additional updates which they break down. Plus, Joe Blackburn touches briefly on Gambit updates in the upcoming Witch Queen era. So we'll talk about it all in the video guys. As always, if you enjoy this one, feel free to get subscribed and I'll keep you posted with Destiny content. But now, let's get into it. Briefly starting out, just yesterday, Joe Blackburn from Bungie spoke about their long-term plans for PvP. That does include new and returning game modes, as well as what they're planning for new maps in the game. So if you want to check that out, I'll link yesterday's video down below. But he did add some conversation about Gambit, and he said long-term, we want to get people working on new maps. Currently, we're playtesting all-up Gambit Foundation changes for Season 16. These are focusing on the heavy ammo economy, primeval fight, the invasion cadence and power, plus a few other things. So those are some of the kind of tuning updates that they're looking at for Season 16, which is the season alongside Witch Queen. We don't know if they have any other plans for Gambit currently, but it sounds like that is when we're going to see some slightly more significant changes. So give us any thoughts you have about Gambit down below. Okay, and now moving to the TWAB stuff for today, we do have a significant number of changes to talk about, and they start out with some kind of unexpected sandbox updates, but initially they're going to be separating melee actions, and they say starting next season, you'll be able to bind your charged melee attack and your uncharged melee attack to separate inputs, giving you greater control of when you use your abilities. This is an opt-in feature, and the new actions will be unbound by default. When you go to customize your controls, you'll see the following new entries in the action list. So Auto Melee is going to be the new name for the melee action that you're used to. Melee is context sensitive, and its behavior will change based on your equipped ability and your proximity to enemies. Then there'll be a charged melee action, and this is a new action that will always activate your charged melee ability upon button press, regardless of whether an enemy is in lunge range. Pressing the input when your melee ability is not fully charged will perform no action and cause the melee ability icon to flash red, similar to how the grenade ability works. And the third action is going to be uncharged melee, and this is a new action that will always activate your uncharged melee, even when your charged melee ability is fully charged. So that's pretty interesting right there, kind of breaking those melees out into separate inputs. So give us any thoughts you have about that, but next they talk about the Season 15 Ability Balance Pass. And for general abilities for Stasis Freeze, they say they're bringing changes to make being frozen by stasis less frustrating, so frozen players can now initiate breakout while airborne. They've also shortened the breakout animation and camera transition, and this means that once you decide to break out, you'll be able to get back to fighting sooner. And they've differentiated long freeze and short freeze visual treatment to make each of the statuses easier to identify. So that should make them a little bit less frustrating. There's also going to be an overall change to slide, and they say the objective is to slightly reduce the effectiveness of sliding into engagements to gain the upper hand. So while sliding, players now incur the following weapon penalties: minus 20 stability, plus 15% shotgun pellet spread, and 1.5 times flinch. So straight up, there are going to be some fairly significant penalties while in the slide animation. That's going to make it generally less effective. There's also a change for Rally Barricade, and they say they want to make it a more viable option. So, standing behind the Rally Barricade now also provides the following weapon buffs: 30% stability, 10% to weapon range, and minus 50% flinch. That's a pretty interesting and positive change. But for all barricade variants, they say they want to make moving through them more dangerous, and so players moving at high velocity now take more damage when moving through hostile Titan barricades. But also barricades now slightly protrude into the ground to better protect the Titan's feet on uneven ground. And this should reduce instances where explosions and projectiles are able to sneak through the bottom of the barricade and hit the Titan. That's another interesting and unexpected change. But now they get into more changes for specific subclasses. And for Titan Behemoth, they've got adjustments to Cryoclasm, and they say they also believe they overdid the movement speed nerf to Behemoths last season, which hurt the viability of Shiver Strike, especially during the Glacial Quake Super. So they're increasing the movement speed to make this feel better. But nonetheless, for Cryoclasm, while equipped, Base Slide now shatters crystals and frozen enemies, and they've increased the duration of screen effects, notifying players that Cryoclasm Long Slide is ready from 1 second to 4.5 seconds. Shiver Strike is seeing its movement speed increased by 25%, and for Whisper of Rhyme they fixed a bug where the overshield provided was not scaling precision damage correctly. So some interesting kind of about turns right there for the Titan subclass. Then for Middle Tree Sunbreaker and the Throwing Hammer, they say they're giving an increased time before the hammer explodes after hitting the ground from 6.5 to 10 seconds, and increased damage versus powerful PvE combatants by minus 50%. So a fairly decent buff right there for the Throwing Hammer. And then for Top and Bottom Tree Striker, in Fists of Havoc, they've increased the slam detonation radius by 14%, but also reduced the slam damage falloff, and reduced the slam attack activation cost from 21% to 18%. That's going to be a reasonably healthy buff right there. Then there is Middle Tree Striker, and they say the changes here will be balanced out by something we haven't mentioned yet. We'll say more about this in a future TWAB, but for Inertia Override, they've increased the duration from 4 to 6 seconds, and sliding over an ammo brick will now grant 20% melee energy. An interesting teaser right there as well. But then we've got the Top Tree Sentinel, and they say these changes refer to the Ward of Dawn bubble itself, and not players inside of the bubble. And so for Ward of Dawn, they've increased the damage taken from bosses from 0.25 times to 7 times at 0 resilience, and the damage taken can now scale down to 0.25 times based on the owner's resilience stat. So interestingly, resilience is actually going to affect the Titan bubble, and of course it's going to be more vulnerable to boss damage. And so a series of interesting changes right there for Titans, but next we get more conversation about Hunters. And for Revenant, the Silence and Squall ability is going to see increased movement speed by 20%, and Squall Storm now stops when it touches a boss. Then for Withering Blade, they've increased the projectile speed and tracking by 10%, and they say that they feel they hit Withering Blade slightly too hard in last season's balance patch. So it's getting a little bit of a buff right there once again. For Middle Tree Gunslinger, they've increased burning duration from 3 to 4 seconds. So small buff on that timer. And then for Top Tree Gunslinger, 6-shooter damage falloff now starts at 25 meters instead of 20 meters. So that's got a little bit more of its range again, which should make it slightly more viable. But we also get a bunch of changes for Arc Strider, and for Arc Staff, they've extended the passive super duration from 16 to 20 seconds. They've also increased the heavy slam detonation radius from 5 meters to 6 meters, and increased overall damage versus PvE combatants by 33%. That's a pretty healthy buff. For the Top Tree Arc Strider, Deadly Reach has got increased duration from 8 seconds to 10 seconds, and Middle Tree Arc Strider and Lightning Weave now allows dealing damage with Tempest Strike to trigger Lightning Weave, and the timer can also be extended by dealing damage with any weapon. But there are also changes to Middle Tree Night Stalker, and for Spectral Blades, they've reduced the damage reduction during Super from 52% to 47%, and they've also reduced additional damage reduction when invisible from 5% to 3%, so a little bit of a nerf right there to Spectral Blades. And finally for subclasses right here and for Warlocks, with Shadebinder and Winter's Wrath, they've reduced the Shatter Pulse damage versus close range supers. And Warlocks must now freeze and shatter twice to defeat players in Burning Wall, Fist of Havoc, Sentinel Shield, Nova Warp, Arc Staff, or Spectral Blades. But they say Glacial Quake still only requires 1 shatter to defeat, making that one a little bit less potent. And then we've got Top Tree Dawnblade, and they say they want to make Heat Rises more accessible to players of all skill levels. And for Celestial Fire, they've reduced tracking cone angle, and the arming shape or proximity detonation now shrinks over time. They've also reduced the detonation size by 1 meter, and damage falloff has been increased at short distances. Icarus Dash, though, will now provide 1 air dodge every 4 seconds, and while under the effects of Heat Rises, this is increased to 2 dodges every 5 seconds. So they are promoting that Heat Rises perk, although I'm sure some Dawnblades will be a little bit sad about that change. For Heat Rises itself, they've increased the duration from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, also increased the time extension awarded for air kills while Heat Rises is active, and the extension duration differs based on the type of enemy killed. And then finally, location will now appear on enemy radar when using Heat Rises in general. So a bit of a mixed bag right there for Dawnblade. Middle Tree Dawnblade though, and Well of Radiance now sees increased damage taken from bosses from 0.25 times to 1.5 times at 0 resilience, and damage taken can scale down to 0.25 times based on the owner's resilience stat, kind of similar to the Titan change. And this refers to the Well of Radiance itself and not the players inside of the well, but they've also increased damage resistance buff versus enemy players from 20% to 40%. So players inside of Well of Radiance are now immune to Stasis, Freeze, and Slow, and the well sword can be frozen and shattered by Stasis itself, so kind of an interesting mix-up right there. But also for Guiding Flame, they've increased the duration from 7 to 10 seconds, and increased the damage buff from 20 to 25%. Then finally we get Bottom Tree Dawnblade, and for Phoenix Dive, they've reduced the delay before the dive starts, and also they're allowing directional inputs to actually give us better agency over where we're going to dive to specifically. Also for Igniting Touch, they say there's an ability rework, and solar ability kills and kills on burning targets now cause them to explode and burn other nearby enemies, which will explode if they die while burning. Then they move on to Stormcaller, and for Middle Tree with Chaos Reach. They say they've increased the beam environment collision size to better match collision size with damage size, and so they're reducing beam damage radius in PvP by 20%, and reducing beam endpoint sphere radius in PvP by 33%, which essentially means we'll need to be a bit more accurate with Chaos Reach, and is also going to reduce the amount of times that it kind of gets kills around objects and things like that. Then there is Bottom Tree Stormcaller, and for Arc Soul, they've increased the duration from 12 to 13 seconds, as well as allowing an increased rate of fire of 10%, so it's going to be a bit more effective. Then for Electrostatic Surge, it increases sprint speed when allies are near, and Landfall now fires 5 arc ground projectiles when you cast it. That sounds pretty interesting, but the very last change they have right here for subclasses is for Middle Tree Voidwalker, and for Nova Warp, they're saying they're increasing the damage versus PvE combatants by 73%, so a really significant damage buff. It also no longer slows movement speed while charging or charged, and detonates on cast. So that's going to be pretty nasty right there in PvE specifically. And for Handheld Supernova, they've increased damage versus PvE combatants by 100%, and increased the hold time from 2.5 to 3.2 seconds. So another significant change right there for the grenade, and that's going to be a pretty tasty one, I think, inside of PvE content. So give us your thoughts about all of the adjustments right there that they're making to subclasses and abilities. They also mention in the TWAB that they're improving the powering up Stasis experience. And starting in Season 15, the Exo Stranger will now reveal more information on how to complete the tasks required for earning Stasis power. So Guardians who have finished the Beyond Light campaign and visit the Exo Stranger will see the entire path for unlocking aspects and fragments. Additionally, many of the pre-requirements for obtaining them will be reduced or removed. Also, Guardians that completed the Beyond Light campaign will have immediate access to the Born in Darkness quest, and the Exo Stranger will also reveal every unowned fragment, regardless of progression through the Born in Darkness questline, giving a preview of many of the powers to unlock. So it's going to give us a bit more information about what we're actually unlocking, and for newer players, it's going to make them generally more accessible, so I think that's another positive. Some of those Stasis quests were a bit over the top. For today though guys, that is what we have to speak about in the videos. So as always, I hope you have enjoyed this one. Let us know any thoughts you have in the comment section, but also feel free to give us a rating down below as it really does help us out on the channel. However, for now, thanks as always for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys very soon.